What's up everyone, it's ENDYMION, and I know usually I would cover Star Wars at this point in the week, but to be real with you, I found this story far more interesting than the slop Disney is churning out today, so I figured I'd cover this instead. From the slanderous ruin of Wizards of the Coast nuking the original creators of Dungeons & Dragons, to woke establishments failing and much more, so let's get into it. This first story, which inspired me to make this video in the first place, comes from a Twitter user named MadScribeGames. To set this all up, recently Wizards of the Coast, which owns Dungeons & Dragons as well as other famous side IPs like Baldur's Gate, which I'm sure you heard of, has released a book for fans that details the origins of Dungeons & Dragons. The book in question is called Dungeons & Dragons: The Making of Original D&D 1970 to 1977. I need to also read you the description for this book to set up how offensive and tone-deaf it all is. Here's the official description of the book itself, and I quote, "Here is the ultimate record of how Dungeons & Dragons came to be. The Making of Original D&D is an extraordinary collection of rare documents that shed light on D&D's origin story. Uncover materials never released to the public, including Gary Gygax's first draft of original D&D. And early published writings such as the 1974 original D&D white box booklets and supplements. Each document is featured alongside insightful commentary from one of the game's foremost historians, John Peterson. Disclaimer: we, Wizards, recognize that some of the legacy content in this product does not reflect the values of the Dungeons & Dragons franchise today. Some older content may reflect ethnic, racial, and gender prejudices that were commonplace in American society at that time. These depictions were wrong then and are wrong today. This content is presented as it was originally created. Because to do otherwise would be the same as claiming these prejudices never existed. Dungeons & Dragons teaches that diversity is a strength, and we strive to make our D&D products as welcoming and inclusive as possible. This part of our work will never end." End quote. So we now know that this book is a collection of what made D&D a thing to begin with, but also that the current Wizards of the Coast, which are some of the most woke activists in any of these sorts of companies today, are hell-bent on transforming the IP into an identity political agenda-driven franchise going forward. Now, from that same user, MadScribeGames, they showed some of the pages within the book itself, which revealed that this supposed celebration book is actually just a bunch of woke activists punching down or up, depending on how you look at it, against the actual creators of D&D back in the day. As you can see, some parts of this book, which I apologize if the actual quality of these scans are not that great, but you can read out that in the text highlighted with red, that D&D's editors are attempting to prove to you, the reader, that D&D was nothing more than a racist creation in its inception, saying things like D&D was casually hurtful to anyone with a physical or mental disability. Another passage reads, "The misogyny is revealed as a conscious choice. It's an unfortunate fact that women seldom appear in original D&D. And when they do, they're usually portrayed disrespectfully. Slaves appear in original D&D not as a human tragedy that devastated generations over centuries, but as a simple commercial transaction. The cultural appropriation of original D&D ranges from the bewildering, like naming every 6th level cleric a llama, to the staggering gods, demigods, and heroes. Not reprinted in this book includes game statistics for sacred figures revered by more than 1 billion people around the world, where players are expected to fight Vishnu, one of the principal deities of Hinduism, kill him, and loot his +3 sword of demon slaying." As you can see, these new age political activists within D&D are effectively combing through the historical text of the franchise and picking out anything and everything that doesn't 100% appeal to their identity political agendas. Saying that Vishnu being an enemy is somehow bad because the god is from Hindu origins, as if that matters, this is fantasy. The Vishnu of that religion and this Vishnu are not a one-to-one depiction. It's like in Final Fantasy, where you can summon beings like Odin, which are obviously from Nordic mythology, yet the game is very clearly made by Japanese people. Just because you can fight Odin doesn't mean Square Enix, who are Japanese, are somehow anti-Nordic or something. There can be different versions of these ideas in varying forms of art. It is neither racist nor is it problematic. Another example is Bahamut in Final Fantasy, which in Final Fantasy is depicted as the king of dragons. Yet in religious forms, Bahamut derives from the Hebrew monster named Bahamut, which also originates from the name Behemoth. And in the Turkish iteration, Bahamut is a giant fish that the giant mythological ox named Kuyuda stands upon as the world is placed upon their shoulders. Yet again, fighting Bahamut is not offensive towards Turkish people, or anyone else for that matter. These are mythological beings, stories if you will, that are meant to convey some sort of otherworldly fantasy-like depiction of why the world is how it is. In the same vein then, God of War is also racist towards Greek people because Kratos obviously kills a bunch of them in the original games and spin-offs. Yet this is not seen as problematic. Could it be because Kratos is depicted as a white man and the Greek gods are also more white than anything else, so it's okay? Would it then be a problem if Kratos were to go to Egypt and kill Egyptian gods? Is that wrong simply because of the color of their skin? After all, Kratos also goes to Nordic origins in the more recent games where he fights Thor and such. But nobody batted an eye or said it was somehow problematic or racist of them to do this. The point I'm trying to make here is that it is not racist to use the mythological beings of various cultures in your work. If anything, this is very commonplace, as I've proven. If Santa Monica Studio with God of War can do it, and so can Square Enix all the way over there in Japan. It's neither racist nor problematic. The reality is that the world as we know it oftentimes finds inspiration in how other cultures view the world around them too. But I think personally that this is very cool, and I find it very beautiful that two cultures that couldn't be more different can look at each other's mythologies and be mesmerized by them. So for Wizards to go this angle is pathetic in my opinion, but sadly it doesn't stop there either. As in another passage in the same D&D history book, the activists over there say stuff like this. Note that the rules for fantastic medieval war games campaigns that make up original D&D were created by and sold to a wargaming community that was almost exclusively white, middle-class men. Yet again, Wizards activists find a way to somehow make it seem like D&D was intrinsically bad because of the sorts of people who were interested in it. Need I remind you, these activists, that D&D was obviously inspired by the men who created it, who were all born and raised in European households. The reason why I bring this up is to explain that D&D being a medieval fantasy series is not by accident but by design, because the depiction of things like holy knights, sorcerers, and such were obviously inspired by medieval Europe as a setting, which, whether these activists want to admit it or not, was completely and totally populated by white European people in real life. So naturally, if a fantasy series like D&D was made with that inspiration, it only makes sense that the people who would originally be connected to such a brand would likely be people who looked like and also grew up in societal structures that originated from that very same monolith. Hence, white people being the predominant customer base of the original D&D. This would be like saying that rap music is racist because it is predominantly inhabited by black people. But the origins of rap music comes from those very same cultures and societies that black people obviously originate from. So it would only be natural that rap music would appeal to black individuals on a far greater scale than say a white guy would. Does this mean that rap music cannot be enjoyed by white people or that D&D cannot be enjoyed or consumed by black people? Absolutely not. Like I already explained, if so many works in our society were inspired by the mythologies and such of varying cultures, it would make sense that anyone could find enjoyment in anything else. D&D is not made for exclusively only white people, the same way it's not racist to eat sushi if you're not Japanese. Culturally limiting people into these small boxes in order to appease your activism will do nothing but pigeonhole and ruin the potential of these various franchises. But what angers me from this book is that Wizards is not only recognizing that D&D was made by white men, but that it bothers them greatly. Sadly, most of the original creators and such have since passed on that were integral to D&D from its world, concepts, and more. There is still one man who lives, however, whose name is Robert J. who had a thing or two to say about this D&D book. Here's what Rob had to say, and I quote, "You know I have to take a break from posting. This whole attack upon old tactical studies rules has really tripped my trigger. A 50th year celebration, and this is it, of the original D&D authors and its supplements. Gary, Dave, Jim Ward, and Brian Bloom are gone. And that leaves me alone as the last man standing, the last author. It really is a burden watching this slanderous episode unfold, and it was done without one bat of the eyelash, a Wizards of the Coast fait accompli. done in such an assumptive manner as if they wield the holy articles on morality which they enact with their reprehensible judge, jury, and executioner demeanor. They are probably wincing and wondering, us, the saints of truth, more like snakes. Anyone who would wait until the majority of authors who created the game were gone to stick it to them in this manner is a vile snake. And just to complete the deed, do it on the 50th anniversary shows their admirers who's in charge, shows them who's in control of the intellectual property. They fear those times they had no hand in creating, and they especially fear Gary Gygax. His name sends shivers up and down their crooked spines, and if it wasn't enough to have hounded him in life, let's do a Houdini and trample on his grave. Disgusting slime, but it's not just Gary or Dave and us others, it's also about wanting to wipe out that success and claim it as their own. And in order to do that, the fandom must be attacked as well as that history. All of it must be purged and never again allowed to exist. These people are the epitome of evil robber barons parading as the good guys. Sleight of hand bullshit from gold hobble prestigitators who don't know fantasy or how to summon it. What they know is how to push down on their little man syndromes by stepping on those whose shoes they can never walk in. That and preaching righteous indignation while counting their bottom lines, taking their vacations, and dreaming about their next cafe latte. Posers one and all, we fought these establishment pukes back in the mid-70s as they gathered about a fledgling tactical studies rules to bring it down. Now it's the second round. Robelair may be a little aged, but he's not dead yet. You have made a permanent enemy of many, you stupid coastal wizards. Let's see how many real magic cards you hold besides illusionary ones, for this battle, neither sought after nor wanted by me and others, is just beginning. You'll get sick of hearing my name soon enough. It's spelled report this as I'm taking a few days off. Peace to the brothers. End quote. Robert here lays it out for all to see that he is disgusted with how his work and those of the other men he worked with over the decades creating Dungeons & Dragons have been treated. He's right, however, that these IPs are being hijacked by activists who can't create anything original themselves, and instead have to resort to walking in the footsteps of giants while complaining the whole way through on how everything is too racist or problematic. You ever wonder how, for the most part, many of these IPs almost never actually bring about anything new but just regurgitate the same characters and concepts over and over? Whether it's D&D, Star Wars, or Magic the Gathering, not to mention Lord of the Rings, which is a part of this too, they can't seem to make any new compelling characters of their own. Instead, Aragorn is race swapped on a magic card instead of just making a new black character in that same universe. One of the only successful examples, of course, would be Baldur's Gate 3, but that game was not made by Wizards of the Coast, which clearly shows because it's objectively great. Larian, of course, made that game. They simply paid for the licensing fee to use the D&D world and concepts, and then they ran with it. And I guarantee you, friends, you will be seeing Shadowheart, Astarion, Karlach, Lae'zel, and many other characters that, again, Wizards did not originally create themselves, profiting and regurgitating into everything they make in the future for the rest of time. Shadowheart toys, books, t-shirts, maybe an Astarion mug. They will take these characters made by better people with real passion and then drive their identities into the dirt until they are no longer profitable or beloved. And then they will cry and state that you are racist for not liking them anymore as their faces are shoved into yours for years to come. It's as Robert stated, they cannot and will never create anything new because they are activists first, and the creator part of their job comes maybe 7th in the long line of what's actually important to these people. And as Robert stated that he, Gygax, and others who made D&D have fought off these exact sorts of business-minded activists since the 1970s. Over 2 decades before I even existed, Robert has been fighting these morons to never get their hands on this IP. But sadly, as the creators slowly passed away over time, I mean, come on, 50 years of D&D, yeah, it's bound to happen. Eventually, through the passage of time, the vanguards of lore will sadly walk into the ever after, but this unfortunately leaves IPs like this prime targets for these activists in kind. And that, my friends, is what we're seeing, a gross, woke bastardization of the history of a franchise none of these people had any hand in creating themselves. You're seeing it with Star Wars right now too. Look how the fanbase reacts to the Acolyte with every passing episode. The apathy has set in with many of these franchises. There are of course bright spots, but the darkness looms ever growing like an insidious cloud of misguided poison. And these cultural parasites who have made their careers out of being up in arms about racism and IPs without lifting a finger themselves are now profiting off the backs and works of men 10 times greater than they could ever hope to be in spirit or mind. It's a sad state of affair, my friends, and it worries me to contemplate where we'll see these franchises in 5 to 10 years' time. I wouldn't be surprised if eventually the name Gary Gygax is slowly but surely erased from the pantheons of Dungeons & Dragons, to be replaced with some trans they-them writer instead as the creator in time. What's the saying? History's written by the victor. In this case, history's being rewritten by the cancerous creatures that claim that these changes are necessary to keep franchises like D&D afloat. Pathetically weak and culturally stifled these activists are. They will be forever jealous that they never could in 100 years come up with a fraction of a franchise of their own making that could be as beloved as D&D. We're currently in a bitter battle for the soul of what makes the franchises we love sing, and it's ultimately resulting in what I can only describe as a stalemate between ideological forces. For every loss we garner a win. Take for example that Kotaku Australia has finally shut down recently. This is what Kotaku's parent company, Pedestrian Group CEO Matt Rowley had to say about the end of Kotaku Australia, and I quote, "Given these factors, we've made the tough decision to focus on our wholly owned pedestrian brands where we control the strategy, the content, the product, the sales, and the outcome, the entire business. This means that we will transition out of our current brand licenses, which will reposition our business for the future. This will have an impact on roles within the group, and I appreciate the uncertainty this change creates as we will be in contact immediately with those people. Where possible, we will look for opportunities for redeployment and will continue to work with everyone over the coming days to support this difficult transition. These titles will no longer be published in Australia, with the majority of their staff to be let go, and licensing deals to publish third-party brands include Vice, Refinery29, Gizmodo, Lifehacker, and Kotaku in coming months." End quote. The point of me telling you the story is that these activist hive minds are slowly but surely dying one by one due to the strangulation of the common consumer, refusing to engage and view these websites and their woke moronic takes. One of the people who worked at Kotaku Australia took to Twitter to confirm the news, as you can see on screen here, and they try to make it seem like that this is a terrible thing that has happened, but it is not surprising whatsoever. I should also tell you, in terms of actual website traffic and views, Kotaku Australia was getting around 1 million page views a month, or basically 1 million views per month. That's it. I get more than that in a month here on this channel, which is ran by just me. The main Kotaku site, which is also struggling mind you, gets somewhere between 8 to 9 million views per month, which may sound like a lot, sure, but when you have to pay the salaries of upwards of 10 plus people who are grossly overpaid to produce slop articles, the tension of the coffers eventually snaps. And to be real with you, I wouldn't be surprised if we see this bastardization of intellectual property continue as time goes on. I'm frankly convinced at this point that once someone like J.K. Rowling kicks the bucket, these activists are going to swoop in on Harry Potter like literal vultures. And 50 years from now, when Rowling is nothing but dust, you'll have the 50th anniversary Harry Potter book come out with all of her original writings and whatnot. And some gender studies major who weaseled their way into an editing position will write in between everything like, "We know Harry Potter is objectively great and features beloved characters and a world that millions love. But please remember that J.K. Rowling is a bigot and a horrible person only because my gender studies teacher told me to think this way, so it must be true." Then after that, they'll reboot Harry Potter again, and suddenly he's a they-them ethnically diverse main character, maybe even non-binary in order to spice things up, and Ron is ginger, so we already know he's gonna be recast as black, and Hermione will be a raging lesbian who Wingardium Leviosa's other female wizards carpets. They're already doing it to Lord of the Rings with slop like Rings of Power. Also, in case you don't know, there's a new Lord of the Rings animated movie called The War of Rohirrim, and it will star Hera, a warrior princess. What's hilarious is that this Hera princess lady is actually not even the main character in Tolkien's works. In the actual book that this is based on, she's literally just window dressing that sits behind her father in the kingdom while he does actual work. But here they are, reimagining Lord of the Rings for a modern audience, so now Hera is the main character when she never was. Also, apparently, according to the info provided, she can commune with great eagles and will also lead a band of warriors that are all female too, because of course she does. This type of crap is happening all over. Eventually Harry Potter will be remade and it won't even star Harry because he's a white male and that's a big no-no these days. Just give it a few years. I guarantee you they'll remake the Lord of the Rings trilogy with a very diverse cast of characters. And Aragorn will be black, Frodo is Mexican, everyone will be changed except for people like Saruman or Sauron, who will obviously be white because, they're the villains. Also, Gandalf will be Asian like Wizards of the Coast did to him already in the cards. Everything must be changed to fit the modern audience, and it is so very tiring, dear viewer. The sobering reality here is that this constant rejection and hatred of the consumer cannot sustain these websites for much longer. And this coincides with D&D and Wizards because need to remind you that they too have been hit with many layoffs just in the last year alone. Back in December 2023, Wizards laid off 1,100 people from the company, many of whom were integral to the conception of Baldur's Gate 3 when it came to working with Larian Studios. But remember, that wasn't all, since in early 2023, Wizards also laid off another 800 people as well. So this is a company that is bleeding money, my friends, and talent as well. In total, within 2023 alone, Wizards of the Coast reduced its entire workforce by 20%. That is genuinely insane. Never mind just the volatile nature of corporations, but how can anyone in good faith think of starting a career working at these places when there is a 1 in 5 chance their entire career will get nuked from orbit like this at any given time? The truth of the matter is simply that it's clearly not working for these companies when it comes to their agendas being pushed whatsoever. Also, in case you want to know, that D&D book, it's like $140 to buy off of Amazon right now. Imagine spending that much money on what is essentially a big book that calls the creators ableist, bigoted, racist the entire time, and claims that they cannot in good faith make the series into what was clearly profitable in the future. Because that would mean confirming that what Gygax, Robert, and others created was actually genuinely great, and this would of course spit in their agenda soup and mean that what they're doing is clearly not working. Maybe if Wizards keeps reducing their workforce, eventually it'll result in a company that is like 50 activists in a room left. And then as fans keep walking away and profits fall, those remaining woke freaks will turn on one another like cannibals in a famine until they just eat each other for the remaining salaries that are left. But this is the current state of Dungeons & Dragons, one of the premier fantasy role-playing series in our world. The creators are lambasted and destroyed, the profits are falling, regular people are being thrown away to keep the company afloat, but hey, at least they're not racist, I guess. Let me know what you think about all of this. Do you still think D&D can be saved? What have you turned in order to fill the void, or have you walked away from all of this altogether? As always, thank you for watching, subscribe, share, and like the video. Thanks to my patrons and my channel members as well. You can subscribe to the membership level if you want for exclusive icons and badges, and it obviously supports me too. Thanks for everything, my friends. Stay based, and I'll see you in the next one.